What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 66 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two, sometimes three best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined this week again by Mr. Max Wright.
Hello, third time's a charm.
Yeah, right, third time's a charm. Welcome back, Max. Glad to have you for some more God of War discussion. Of course,
Absolutely.
I gave Steve the week off. He didn't have too much to say last week. We figured we'd bring Max back up to the big leagues.
Co-host, we love it.
And then, of course, for the first time, please welcome SightlessKombat to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for having me on here. I'm a huge God of War fan, as you will soon discover.
Yeah, I'm very excited to chat with you about it today because, of course, we are going to be talking a little bit more. We're going to keep the God of War conversation rolling from last week, but more importantly, in our main topic, we're going to discuss the ins and outs of accessibility in gaming. Yay. With, of course, the focus being on God of War Ragnarok. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, Sightless, why don't you, for those who don't know you, give yourself a quick introduction and let people know like what your content's like and where they can find it.
Yeah, cool. So, hi everybody, I'm SightlessKombat, accessibility consultant and gamer without sight, and also accessible gaming and immersive technologies research officer for RNIB, that is Royal National Institute of Blind People in the UK, the sight loss charity. But for the past several years, I've been doing Twitch streams, well, not just Twitch, but streaming generally, YouTube content, and posting things on Twitter, writing reviews for my website, and presentations as well at events like GAConf, the Game Accessibility Conference, as well as other places as well. So EGX, you might have seen me doing panels and presentations at, for instance, as well. But also, of course, consulting with studios directly. So recently being in the credits for games like Halo Infinite, the online credits for that, being shouted out for things like Sea of Thieves, as well as Horizon Forbidden West earlier this year, and of course, God of War Ragnarok. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Yeah, just a couple little indie games that you helped work on,
just a couple of small things. Yeah. No.
Yeah, big sheet of accomplishments there.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. But to be clear, when I say gamer without sight, I do mean I have absolutely no sight whatsoever. I had to start using that phrase because people were like, "How much can you see then?" And I'm like, I can't. I've just said. Or they would say, "Oh, so you're a blind gamer, aren't you?" And I'd be like, "Well, technically yes, but I use the term gamer without sight because legal blindness, which is often just shortened to being blind, can and often does include usable and/or residual vision, which I've never had. So, if people ever wonder, if you're a gamer without sight, how much sight do you have? That's basically none at all. That's why it is the way it is, as a phrase. So and if you're wondering where you can find me, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, SightlessKombat, SightlessKombat, and my website as well, www.sightlesskombat.com, if you want to go and check out, for instance, my reviews, including the early impressions and review of, have a guess, God of War Ragnarok.
God of War. And like I said, we're going to be talking all about God of War today, including just, kind of getting some of your thoughts on the game so far and everything, because I know you've been streaming it over on your Twitch channel. But I did want to ask, before we get into all that, I'm very interested about your journey to becoming, SightlessKombat. Like, what is your background in games? When did you start playing games? And when did you decide that getting involved in, helping developers like Sony Santa Monica and some of the others that you've named, kind of improve their accessibility game?
Well, accessibility game, pun intended.
Yes, it was.
Well done. Good. Completely intentional, I'm sure. Yeah, so I started playing games, I've been playing games for longer than I can remember, video games and of various fashions and forms. But, I started out with, games like Fighter Pilot. That was a weird and interesting title. But it wasn't necessarily that I knew what I was doing, because at that point in my life, I didn't know how screen readers worked, how any of the tech worked, any of that. I was just kind of pressing buttons and literally nosediving a plane into unseen territory. But then I moved on to audio only stuff. I was introduced to that through a very unusual, sort of very cheesy game called Grizzly Gulch Western Extravaganza. Sort of like a 4 or 5 key Red Dead Redemption, several years early and not quite as complex. But a game where you learn about gambling, gunfights, and bribery in the eponymous town of Grizzly Gulch. All great things to learn from a very young age.
We all grew up on GTA, didn't we? So it
Yeah,
all
right.
makes sense.
Well, I suppose it's the the very strange equivalent, I guess. But no, it's an interesting little sort of audio only game that used the arrow keys to navigate you around the town and the spacebar to get help, pretty much. But then from there, I realized that sighted people didn't want to necessarily, get involved with audio only games because there's nothing to keep the interest, arguably, in terms of visuals or anything. Because audio games, as a general rule, are designed to be played by those with low or no vision. So, if they have graphics, they'll be rudimentary at best. Games like Shades of Doom, a very cool shooter from the early 2000s, exemplifies that arguably, where it just has very, very basic graphics that you can decode should you wish, to understand it, but it won't give you any extra information that a person playing with just audio wouldn't have, let's say. So, you won't get enemies being identified by color as to any sort of particular strength levels or any kind of sort of complexity in that regard. But the point is, you'd still get the same parity of information, which is a
Really
thing we'll
interesting.
likely come onto later. But then from there, fast forward to the console games that I started looking at. So mostly fighting games. So Tekken 3, Street Fighter EX plus Alpha. Those are two very vivid memories, and it was basically so I could integrate with my peers,
Sure.
arguably. Even if I wasn't very good at it, but because this was at a time where move lists, they were possibly available on the internet, but I wasn't necessarily involved in that side of things at that point. And even then, if I could get a person to read the move list, they wouldn't be able to understand it because it's like there's 2 arrows and a yellow foot, and I'd be like, I don't know what that means. And it's like there's
Also, can they read it quick enough for you to be able to pop out a combo?
No, it wouldn't so much be that as even understanding what the moves are in the first place, let alone how combos work. It's like
Sure.
there's a right arrow and a green fist or a red other thing, and
Red
it's like
foot.
we have no there's a red foot, a green fist, and a yellow thing. It's like we have no idea what these are.
They don't correspond to any of the buttons on the controller.
Exactly. It's like this
Press
has
the
no
yellow
meaning.
button. What?
So
What
it's
do you
like
mean?
it's like there's no yellow button. How does this? Okay, but so that's that's an interesting time to look back on. Arguably, even when you're going to look at games now, it's like, can we find a move list for this game? And then thankfully somebody's written it out as down forward triangle for a
Yeah.
fireball, and it's like
Sure.
this makes sense.
It's like loading an old PC game, and it's like press the action button. You're like, okay, which one of these is supposed to be the action button? Press kick to kick. Which one's kick? Show me which button that is.
We'll come. Remind me about that later. We'll come on to that later.
Brilliant.
But there's a fun. Oh, of course, there's the old one of press any key. It's like which one's the any key? That's an old one, but it works. But yeah, in regards to that, fast forward many years to the Xbox One, which is arguably where I really started getting involved in accessibility, because the PlayStation 4 had text to speech introduced in a beta firmware version. This was back in 2015, and then the Xbox One had it announced for November the 12th that year, which was when it would launch in certain regions with narrator. And I figured out through assistance from other people or advice from other people, I can switch this over so I can actually use my Xbox even though I'm not in that region to use narrator and give it a try. Consequently, I did, and that is a night and day difference. And from there, I've never really looked back. But to be able to, start my journey, I had to start somewhere. And I thought, let's review some stuff and see what we can do, because I'd seen a lot of unboxing videos. And the thing with unboxing videos is there's not a lot of talking about it. Not necessarily. It's mostly just,
Sure.
let's see what's in the box. Crinkly noises. Ooh, shiny thing. More crinkly
Yeah.
noises. Ooh, what's this? A controller. Bang, crash, crinkly noises. And there's batteries in here. And that's about it. Whereas what I decided to do was think, look, if I get this product through, if I order it and then get it through from like Amazon or whatever, what would I need to do to get it open, set it up, and running without any assistance whatsoever, at least in theory, or as little assistance as possible where needed. So that included stuff like descriptions of the product where needed, so where all the different buttons were and what they did, or any confusions I'd had as to the buttons, or how to even just a straightforward thing like how to get the adhesive seals off of a box, because those can be a bit of a nightmare. It's like, do you peel it? Do you have to, with these ones, do you have to slice it open? Are they a bit complicated? All of that stuff all comes into it. And so I started doing those, started, asking around and seeing what I could source from people or buy myself if I couldn't. And the Xbox One was one of those early efforts. And then from there, I started, getting review units. I eventually got one from Microsoft for the Gears of War 4 Xbox One S, an amazing bundle, like special edition. It was the red one with all the claw marks.
I
That's
remember,
awesome.
yeah.
That. It's a brilliant piece of
I think
kit.
it came. It had an elite controller that was red as well, wasn't it? I believe.
It wasn't the Elite that it came with, but it did come with
Okay.
its own red controller. I do have the Elite from that as well, actually. I was fortunate enough to get hold of one of those. But yeah, that's kind of, and it went from strength to strength. I started putting content up on YouTube about the same time, showing off accessibility features and things, and then progressed to doing commentary videos, and then fast forward many years to now, where I'm streaming and I'm able to do all of that with the aid of
Getting your name in the credits
accessibility and
of
stuff.
every Game of the Year contender for the last 2 years. No big deal,
If only. I can't even remember what last year's Game of the Year was. Thinking about it, I'm trying to.
We're going to say it was
Metroid
Halo,
Dread,
just
so
for the sake of
everyone, it
argument.
was Metroid Dread. Why not?
So, no, I wasn't in the credits for that one. you never know, though.
All right, Nintendo's got to come knocking. Yeah, that's. I think we all know they could improve their accessibility features,
Absolutely.
right? So
I wasn't going to say anything.
I'll say it for you.
Yeah. Fair enough. But yeah, God of War. I know, we're gonna. I thought you might say this anyway, but in terms of how God of War blends into all of this, I played God of War while I was at Gorilla, while I was talking about Horizon stuff at Gorilla a few years ago, and in their press room, which was amazing, like a big sort of surround sound and everything. It was absolutely fantastic. And I'd never played a God of War game, not in like a real sense of actually understanding what it was, how it worked, or anything like that. So playing God of War 2018 and having it be this amazing, this huge thing that I'd kind of just heard about, and it was like, the axe is really cool. I don't know how much I'd read when I got to play it, but I was pretty excited about the idea of it, because I definitely remember asking, do you have a copy of God of War that I can have a look at? And the end result was yes. And I got to play around with it, and I was like, I kind of understand it. If you want to see footage, raw, not actual live in-person footage, but actual gameplay of me kind of adjusting to how it worked, there's actually footage on my YouTube channel that we captured on the day.
Oh, cool.
I had to sort of ask and be like, look, have we got any of this stuff captured? Because it was just kind of interesting. And then, I watched that now after the things that I'm about to say about, and I'm like, wow, how did I even survive any fights with this? Because I then went on to play with sighted assistance via a thing called the Titan 2, which I might be able to. There we go. Yep. I'm going to reach off camera and bring it out. There we go. The Titan 2.
Okay.
A small rectangular box with 2 USB ports on the front. And if I flip it around, a couple of micro USBs on the back and a couple of buttons on the top, which I never use. But the point being, that little device allows you to connect 2 controllers that will act simultaneously as one to a console or platform of your choice.
Oh.
So if you've ever used Copilot on Xbox One or the Xbox family or Windows, or even in Horizon Forbidden West, which is the only PS5 game that I know of as of the time of writing to have the feature, you can actually have a similar experience if you've used any of those as well. So God of War alongside Uncharted 4, that was an amazing game to do it with, and numerous others as well, are games that I've played with the Titan 2 with sighted assistance to move around and get me lined up on aiming for puzzles and things.
Okay.
All sorts of stuff like that. Because of course the accessibility in those games wasn't as high as it needed to be to actually get anywhere with it without assistance. So, but then then I went from there to. So I played through the story, thought the story's amazing in God of War 2018, and then thought, look, I want to take on the Valkyries because I heard about it. And actually, an amazing friend of mine and collaborator in the States who helped co-found the Transcribing Games project, where we add audio description to video game footage. So whether that's trailers, whether that's actual edited gameplay, all that kind of stuff, as well as going deeper with things like text descriptions and transcripts of the scenes we've already put to video. With that, Jenna, sorry, the wonderful collaborator from the States, basically said, yeah, you can take on the Valks, I'll help you do it, kind of thing as well. And I was like, fine, yeah, why not? We'll give it a go. And we actually went through and got the platinum
That's awesome.
January 2021. But we went further than that. I still can't quite believe we did this. We decided in prep for Ragnarok, we thought, you know what? We've done all of this. We've beaten all the Valks and all the other optional bosses and everything, and including Sigrun. I don't need to say much other than just Sigrun. If you know, you know just how tough that is.
Yeah.
But we decided, we were like, why the heck not? We're going to go in and do everything again on New Game Plus.
Oh wow! Okay.
Nice.
So we've not just done it once; we've done it twice. So, and there's
what difficulty were you playing on at the time? Actually, out of interest, like
what on New Game Plus, we were on. I've got a feeling it was normal plus, and then I think we moved a couple of the fights down for just ease.
Of course.
I think Sigrun we might have done. I can't remember.
Because I often wonder in terms of accessibility, like how games often have now like a story only mode or like a story difficulty mode. Is it does accessibility scale? Like if you were playing on a harder mode, would the level of accessibility get any higher, or like how does it work? Is it all about player skill still?
It's definitely all about player skill. Well, like accessibility. Say you turn on. We'll come on to Ragnarok's feature set. We might as well sort of integrate that into the conversation.
Sure.
We have the nav assist, that kind of thing. The auto aim, the target lock, all those kinds of things, and the audio cues. Those don't change when you scale your difficulty. Those won't lessen or be at greater frequency just because you're on a higher or lower difficulty.
Okay.
What stuff like timing your dodges or your shield bash or whatever, all of that kind of comes down to skill, but it also kind of comes down to how much time the game gives you. I've been in situations where before it would be like, okay, this enemy comes at me at this speed and I can kind of judge it, whereas on higher difficulties it's like, oh good lord, that is much faster. Okay.
They change their sometimes they'll pause before an attack, classic Elden Ring and Dark Souls move that is. I've encountered that a few times against some of the bosses in Ragnarok.
I thankfully haven't seen that yet, but I mean, I wouldn't have seen it anyway. But that's beside the point. The puns, they always happen on stream, and they will happen here. But yeah, with that, I haven't really fought any of the end game stuff yet. I'm going for 100% run as of the time of this recording on stream alongside Jenna and DB, both of my collaborators from the States, and we're all three of us are working on essentially on one save file as a kind of a double duo, if you like. So it's me and one co-host or me and the other playing together. The fun thing is they have no control over what I'm doing other than telling me what to do. Partly because of technical limitations, because the Titan 2 doesn't currently work with PS5 hardware, so it can't sort of interface properly with the DualSense to let us do it the way we would with, say, the PS4 build. That's a whole other discussion in terms of controller interfaces and accessibility. But the point being, it's actually quite fun because I can do a lot of it anyway with the nav assist and everything between the puzzles where I might get stuck, let's say. So
yeah, I wanted to actually ask about that because I checked out a couple episodes of your stream over on Twitch, and I saw that you were playing with DB, your collaborator, and I was interested because I was watching the kind of first encounter that Kratos gets into, like early in the game where all the raiders, all the raiders jump out, right? And I noticed that DB is giving you like cues of like, oh, like enemies are approaching, right? Or like Kratos pulls out he's kind of like narrating.
That's just audio description, basically, without it being sort of officially integrated into the game. That's just audio description. If you're not familiar with what that is a secondary track traditionally played over, films, theaters. They do it live. You've got adverts doing it now as well. So it's a big thing. Trailers do it. Audio description. Yeah, it's a huge thing. So but that's basically what he's doing, sort of in a live context on stream. He's not necessarily telling me, oh, there's an attack coming, or you need to dodge, or whatever. Because he and I have worked together for long enough, much like me and Jenna, where they know they don't need to necessarily tell me that unless there's not a cue for it. So say there's an unblockable attack where there's not a cue to tell me it's unblockable, and they have enough time to call it. I'm like, okay, fine. You just tell me that one thing that I need, because the game doesn't give me the information, sort of thing.
Right. And like I noticed there was an interaction where you had mentioned to DB, you're like, yeah, like if I'm about to walk by something, like call it out or something like that, and I remember there was a moment like that. So I wanted to ask, like you said that is essentially what that feature is like in normal gameplay. So is that something that's being granted by like third-party technology, or is that developers creating that audio track to run alongside gameplay for those who are vision impaired?
So if that were to be introduced natively into the game, as we've seen with Last of Us Part 1 earlier this year, that is directly in the game itself. What you are seeing on stream is DB is actually watching a feed of my game through his own console, because we're using PlayStation Screen Share, because it's relatively low latency. So he's essentially seeing. Exactly. You need it to be as lag-free as you can get it.
Yeah.
Otherwise that information, I guess, would just be kind of useless, right? Like,
well, exactly. Like if I'm 20 feet away from a chest, and you're like, "Oh, there's a chest," and it's like, "No, you've gone way past it." Like, hang on. Like now we got to backtrack. It's like, where was it? And now I'm in like the next area or the next sequence. He's seeing a low latency feed of my game, and I can then, he can then just tell me, "Oh, to your left a little, there's a chest," and I'm like, "Okay, yep." And sometimes I'll have heard like an interact prompt, to my left, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's what that is. Okay, cool."
Huh.
Or other times, it'll be way over to the left, so I wouldn't hear a prompt at all. I'm like, "Oh, cool, thanks, nice."
So,
or other stuff like that. So
when it comes to and we're gonna jump around a little bit when it comes to God of War, but when it comes to like a game like God of War, right? I was interested to ask, when it comes to like the running audio track, do you ever find that like is hard to like piece between, because there's so much ambient dialogue in God of War, like the characters are always kind of just like jawing on while you're walking around, So like, is there ever a moment where you're
you say it.
is there like
they're just jawing away, just chatting
away?
away.
they're chatting shit. And it's like, do you ever have that moment where you're like, oh, like, I missed a cue because, Mimir is flapping his gums, or like vice versa, where you're like, oh, I missed that dialogue because, I got a cue about how, the combat works?
It kind of happens, but it's really quite rare. The audio mix is actually really solid in both games, I'd argue. Not just in 2018 or in Ragnarok, in 2018 as well. There's rarely, I can't think of many moments where the dialogue overpowers the combat stuff, because the combat stuff is arguably designed to play above it anyway to an extent. Like even when you've got even when Atreus is like, "Yikes, that looked like that hurt," and Kratos is like, "Don't worry about me," kind of thing, then it's fine, because you can still hear pretty much all the audio you need to know anyway above it. And even during the transcribing games stuff, when we've edited those together, we try and keep our dialogue as describers out of the way of the game's dialogue. Unless, of course, you feel you can speak over it, which occasionally you can for the sake of describing important events, or if the dialogue is considered relatively inconsequential. So say you get like, I don't know, like say a 20-word sentence, 10 words of it are irrelevant and the other 10 are crucial to the plot. I don't know quite why that would be, but say that were to happen, then you can talk over the first 10 words, and you need to have that piece of script finished by the end of those 10. So that then the final 10, which are saying, oh, I don't know, Thor's got a big hammer. I don't know. Or Thor is a calm and reasonable person. You can kind of work with that and then just have that be the key dialogue you hear. So, yeah, there's definitely interesting questions around that.
And speaking of which, we have a lot of interesting questions around accessibility in God of War Ragnarok. But before we get to the rest of those, I do want to just take a second to remind you listeners that this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of November. They are, of course, Christian Oliveria, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobi, Mary Berry, Wakahula, and Zaid Ida. If you want to show your support just like they did, you can head over to flipscreen.games and find links to all the places we are, all over the web, right into the show. Join the Discord. However you choose to get involved, we appreciate you tuning into this week's show. So let's keep the conversation rolling here. I want to ask you a couple kind of specific questions about God of War's accessibility and I guess just kind of how it compares, right? Like, how do you find that God of War Ragnarok's accessibility features stack up to kind of the general gaming landscape? Like, is it... would you describe it as being like a really good example of how to do it right? Is it kind of, a step in the right direction? Like, where does it fall on that overall? Because I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that The Last of Us feels like the gold standard to me.
Yes, that is still arguably true. You could say that games like As Dusk Falls are sort of coming up on that as well, even in spite of a few small issues that were acknowledged a while ago with that game. That is fully playable. That's an Xbox and PC thing that you can play fully through without needing assistance. That's got accessibility in as well. But The Last of Us is kind of still the standard that everybody looks to. But it's interesting because Ragnarok, whilst it's not flawless, whilst there are issues with it, sort of flaws in the accessibility framework, what needs to be considered, I think, is that it is a huge, astronomical step in the right direction for a new genre, really, or rather a genre that is new to accessibility. Because historically, by that I mean Last of Us is very much a stealth game. Well, a lot of the time, except if you decide to play aggressive, and even then, there's a lot of time spent, gathering resources, staying at range. So you're rarely engaging in melee. Even in part one, the only times you engage in melee is if you're absolutely desperate, or if an enemy runs up to you and decides to engage in melee as well. So the encounters are not arguably on your terms; they are mostly on the terms of the enemies. I would, argue maybe. With God of War, it kind of reverses that, because in a lot of ways, I mean, yes, you have your ranged options with the axe, with the blades, with Atreus, but by the same token, there is a lot of incentive to go in and just hit the enemy as hard in the face with whatever you've got. And, that's a very different approach in itself. Coupling that with, of course, the fact that you have, the enemies drop resources, and you don't have to really go looking. You can go looking for stuff like hack silver or chest or whatever, but the loot that you need to progress throughout pretty much all the core game is, there. When you kill an enemy, they will drop stuff pretty much guaranteed after an encounter, and you can just grab it all and go.
And it's impossible to miss now as well, considering you go back to Brock and Sindri, and they've just given you stuff in the chest, right?
I don't know if they give you everything, but they give you a lot.
I think it's anything that an enemy drops, or that like you break from like a wall, or anything you break from or knock down, or anything that you can sort of that appears on the floor that you don't pick up, they will pick up for you.
There's also an auto pickup feature, which is my favorite thing that any video game has ever offered me.
I have not turned that on.
Auto pickup is great. Did you know that that's actually in Last of Us Part 1 as well?
No, I haven't played Part 1 yet.
Part 2, it's in Part 2 as well, as far as I can.
Oh, really?
recall.
Okay.
Yeah, you just it saves you a lot of going around and pressing
Hammering circle while you walk
circle,
around in a
yeah.
circle. Yeah.
Nothing
Trying
drives me.
trying to get that health pick up while you're in the middle of a fight, just walking backwards with your
Yeah,
shield
it's
up.
like, dude, I'm in the middle of fighting for my life. Like, pick up the thing,
Yeah.
Kratos.
And then you accidentally trigger your relic instead, and you're like, no!
Yep.
I do not want to trigger my melee damage boost, for goodness sake. But no, like that being said, it's a huge step in the right direction, and it's the good thing is the team clearly care about accessibility. I mean, they released their first accessibility information in May of this year. Like that is a huge gap of time in the best way. And I put a video out at the time saying, could this be a fully accessible God of War game? And I was almost right. I've beaten the game already. I beat it I finished beating it a couple of days before release, thanks to my amazingly provided review copy. Thanks to Sony and PlayStation for providing me that in advance. But I was able to, with minimal sighted assistance, with a few of the puzzles, a couple of places where I got a little stuck due to nav assist and things, just not quite working as intended for reasons, I guess you could say. With the minimal sighted assistance I needed, I got through like the whole main game. Was it a bit of a slog at times because I was under-leveled? Probably. Was I under-leveled because nav assist wouldn't necessarily track all the things I would like it to track? So, certain side quests or things? Probably. But if you consider it from the lens of, 2018 versus Ragnarok is a massive, a huge milestone that should be praised and recognized. And a lot of people might say, I've seen people, wanting to cancel their orders when they found out the accessibility wasn't quite as up to scratch as they would have preferred. But I've also seen people going the other way and saying, look, I'm canceling it, but I'm only if once the game becomes accessible, fully playable without needing assistance or whatever, once these certain things are rectified, then they're going to buy the game. So there's a great deal of optimism, I think, for what the amazing team are doing. Shout out to the wonderful Mila Pavlin, who is a key figure, but one of many in terms of the accessibility of God of War Ragnarok as well. And of course, all the other people at Sony Santa Monica who've taken the time and effort to talk to everybody and put those features in that are making it so much easier for other people to play who might not have been able to play through before. Because with a game like this, I would have needed, if this game didn't have the accessibility it has, I would have had to have constant assistance, and I would probably not be anywhere near finishing the game at this point.
Sure.
Partly because I'd probably got distracted by side quests. And like, I need to level myself up to get through this thing. I don't know. But now it's a matter of, once you get me through this section, let's say, like there's a section near the end of the game where once you get through a load of different puzzles, then it's pretty much a straight shot to the end of the game. And it's like, okay, I can do pretty much all of this with a little luck as well in places to get through certain aspects of it. But I managed to do that whole section without needing to say to anybody, can you come and give me a hand with this puzzle, please? I'm stuck again. So, it makes a massive difference to morale as well. When you know that the only thing standing in your way is just your, like most of the time, just your skill in, say, a combat encounter. And then as opposed to, oh, this puzzle is, a real chore or whatever, and I can't get through it. If you can get through a puzzle, sometimes you can fluke those. I'm going to be the first to admit to say that I've fluked a few, even on stream. I managed to hit a couple of later puzzles. I'm not going to say what the mechanics are because I don't want to spoil anything. But there's a couple of cool mechanics where I, did a thing and I managed to get it first try, and I was like, "Yay! Now we don't have to worry about that puzzle." So
that's great,
and that happens. It's funny. It's not the ideal way to play it, but it works and it gets you through. That shouldn't be said to be, oh, that means the game is fine. There are menus that don't read, there are things that don't track, but it is the most accessible God of War game to date, and nobody can refute that, I don't think. So that's the takeaway I want people to have. It is the most accessible God of War game to date. It is a good starting point for any people who want to design, combat experiences from the ground up with accessibility in mind, because it shows all sides of it in terms of what works well, what might need to be factored in at certain points. There's all sorts of ways to look at it, but it's an accessible game. If you have the assistance you need, you can get through the whole thing. And even if you don't have the assistance you need, you might be lucky enough to get through all of it anyway. But I hope that's a good enough answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it raises another question for me that you made the point before about how, like the goal should be for you to be able to get through the game without assistance or with limited assistance.
Well,
so
no, without assistance at all. Let's be clear. The goal is 100% fully playable without assistance. Last of Us Part 2, I got through separately on grounded and on permadeath in separate
wow,
runs.
okay. Yeah, so that speaks to how much better those are serving you.
All without assistance. But to be fair to Ragnarok, I am currently playing it through on Give Me God of War. So
Oh wow.
Okay, good.
With only assistance being needed for those few small problematic puzzles that might be an issue. Now, admittedly, that does mean I'm suffering from, for lack of a better description, leveling problems.
Sure.
By that I mean occasionally enemies will hit much harder than they need to because I don't have the extra levels I might need or other players might be able to get with sight. But that being said, if you see people doing 2018 runs with fists only or level 1 Kratos or whatever, I'm sure that you can do it just based on skill and maybe elements of luck with the AI and everything.
Sure.
Because that's how Give Me God of War kind of works. There's luck, there's skill, but even if you were at level 1, even if you have to dodge 3 times as many attacks, hit 3 times as many melees in succession, you could still probably do it. And the only assistance you would need would be the assistance that you would have on any other difficulty, whether that be with skill trees, whether that be with the puzzles or anything. So yeah, the goal is for any accessible game, the goal should be to be playable 100% without any assistance being needed. Whether you've got sight, whether you've got no sight, whether you've got other disabilities as well, or instead of, that should be the goal for any developer, really. Sorry to kind of
No. I appreciate you clarifying, because I guess the question I'm kind of circling in my brain is if you do end up in one of those scenarios where you're facing down a puzzle and like the tools that are being provided aren't enough to give you the information you need to solve. Like, is your only recourse in that situation to like get help from another person? Like, is there like a resource for for gamers to go and like seek out and try to like trade tips or things like that? Or is there any?
I mean, yeah, there are forums and places where that could be done. Though I'll admit, with a game like this where it's full 360-degree movement and full up and down sort of aiming and stuff,
Yeah,
it gets a little complicated because even if you say aim slightly to the left, your slightly to the left might be different from mine. Let's say.
to the left of what, right? Like,
Well, no. Even if you have a thing to aim at, so say you're saying, oh, aim at the, I don't know, aim at the object that's making a noise in the center of your screen when you nav assist over. Even if you have a reference point, that doesn't mean you're going to guarantee to get that tiny little hitbox that's over to the left of the screen and up a little. You might get it
first
first time, but equally, I've seen people really struggle with those, and it's like, I am genuinely stuck on this puzzle. So it depends on, I'm not going to say it's all down to this, but it can also depend on stuff like how familiar you are with video games in general. It can depend on how much you've used a controller before, because even then you're like, how do I do this? And it's saying press this button to do this, and it's like you said earlier, one of you said earlier about the idea of press kick button to kick. God of War Ragnarok's tutorialization does exactly that pretty much. It says, what is it? Double tap block button to shield strike attacks with double blue rings. And it's like there is an audio cue for those attacks, but up to that point you would know what your block is, hopefully, because that's quite far into the game that you start
Yeah.
seeing, or well,
Sure.
not quite far. It's a reasonable amount of time into the game where you would have started to see that. But
You're in
even
Alfheim, I
the
think. So yeah, it's like the
yeah,
second area.
I
I
wasn't
believe.
going to say where it was. I'm trying to keep
Oh.
as spoiler free as I can.
Come on,
We did
Max.
we did the first 5 hours last week. Alfheim's the first 5
Did you?
hours.
Oh, okay. Did you? I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I wasn't sure.
For,
what
you can
was.
spoil for the first 5 hours.
Well, I mean, there's a good question though.
Whose
The
first 5
hours? Exactly. Like when I played the early impressions for this game, I got unfortunately there was an accessibility issue that I experienced that made me unable to progress without assistance through Svartalfheim. And that issue was subsequently patched, and then I was able to go through it with a little assistance on the puzzles. But other than that, it was fine. So my early impressions, I didn't get to see the point where the official early impressions ended until a little while later,
Right.
which was very interesting. So the first 5 hours, depending on not only your difficulty, your skill level, your general understanding about the mechanics of these kinds of games work, all of that kind of figures into it. But it's also the fact of how much you can actually do off to the side of it. So say you get a side quest that can track like you do in Svartalfheim, you can earn one. You can earn a side quest by talking to an NPC, and you get that side quest. That one actually can track. It can be done without assistance. It's a little tricky. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a little convoluted in places. You get stuck in a couple of looping nav assist areas, which are slightly frustrating. But if you can get yourself out of those, then you're all right. And I did it the other day in about, I don't know how long it took me. It didn't take me massively long. I think I had a couple of nav assist boats, sort of geometry collision things happen while I was trying to do it. But that was fine. I did the quest in a relatively short time, though. I was trying to test myself to see if I could do it without assistance, and I managed it. The point being, if you are able to go and track those things, if say you've got low vision and you can go and track those markers easily, that will change what you can do in the first 5 hours.
Sure.
That will massively change it. So, but I know what you mean. But in terms of the back to the point on tutorialization, even when you see press block button to raise your shield, it's like which one's block?
Yeah.
And then you have to go through and look at the controls, and the controls are currently at least read in a giant long string. I remember the first time I went to look. I mentioned it in my review. The first time I went to find a control I needed, I forget what it was now, to check what I was looking at. And the control I needed was no joke, it was right at the end of the list. So,
Oh my God, you gotta listen to the whole list.
but that the good thing is there is a control list there that you can go and look at that will read. So a lot of games, even if they don't have accessibility, then you're not going to be able to read the controller listings, and you're not going to know what's going on. So you then have to get sighted assistance, because optical character recognition, or OCR, a popular workaround for that kind of thing, that doesn't actually work for controller buttons, because when it tries to take a screenshot of the screen, it doesn't recognize icons because they're not text, because that's what OCR does. It tries to recognize text from an image. So if you've ever tried to scan a PDF, that's sometimes what it might do.
So does that extend? Because I could understand with PlayStation, right? Because it's symbols, but does that extend to if it's Xbox or Switch, where it's letters?
I've not tried a Switch. I don't actually own a Switch. I've been looking into it, trying to see if I can justify it given the smaller number of accessible titles on that platform. And the ecosystem in general, all of that. That's again whole other discussion. Maybe one to have in the future.
Yeah, we'd love to have you on Nintendo Noise to talk about that sometimes.
Could be interesting, but in terms of that though, even with Xbox and stuff, it does extend to that. Even the fun thing is I've discovered a way to read the skills menu, which is with PS Remote Play, so PlayStation's own remote play service. So what you do is instead of reading it off of your capture card, which I think some people might have gotten that to work, but I never did. Whereas the equipment menu seemed to work fine, and that wasn't a problem. I don't know why that is. It's very strange. But the skills menu with PS Remote Play, you just hook up your PlayStation to network, you connect to it via remote play, and you use optical character recognition to scan it. Now, it does read it pretty well. It's not exactly, English. There's a few strange characters that get inserted here or there. But the point is, I can tell what a skill does. I can't tell you necessarily how much it costs, but I can tell you, oh, this is hold a button to then, throw to have the axe multi-hit in midair. And it's like, okay, I get roughly what it's trying to do. I might not know what button I need to use, but I can either guess or go and look it up on somebody else's guide. Because there are a couple, I can't think what one I used the other day, but I found a guide that actually showed you all the skills, and it showed the button prompts. So I was very pleased. I was like, oh, that's how, why haven't I been able to do this skill? Oh, I've been holding the wrong button the whole time. Fine. So that happens. But yeah, it's a bit of a struggle with whatever game you're looking at, because even if you know what actions are available. So in a game, say there's a game with mostly parkour mechanics that were to be accessible, hypothetically. It said there's like a dodge, there's a tuck, there's a roll, there's a jump, there's a flip. I don't know. With all those buttons, it would probably read the names of the buttons. So it would read, flip, backflip, dodge, jump, roll, tuck, etc. But it wouldn't read you the actual buttons you need to press. It wouldn't say, jump is X or A or whatever it happens to be. So, that's partly to do with clean fonts sometimes, but it's also mostly to do with the fact that they're icons in the first place.
And I guess that kind of ties back to the point you made earlier too, where like how easy it is to parse through that is like has to do somewhat with like how experienced you are with games, right? Where it's like, well, it's like jump is usually this button, block is often this button, right? It's like you can probably parse a lot of that just from like trial and error.
Yeah, that too. And sometimes you just have to be aware of it. Like, if you know God of War, if you've played God of War 2018, you will kind of know how to play Ragnarok. Not completely, because there's a few mechanics that
you're like, I know how to call the axe back, like
it's like exactly. It's like when it says, oh, was it press weapon signature button to do this? It's like, okay, that's probably triangle. Like, you don't necessarily need to look at all the controls. You might want to just for peace of mind, but you don't have to.
Sure.
There's a key difference, and it's interesting. I actually watched a very very good friend of mine and a long time viewer of my streams, who's also a gamer without sight, Jukesy. I actually watched him play through the opening of Ragnarok. Bearing in mind, he'd never played a God of War game at all. He'd never even played 2018. He'd not had the chance. And yet, where he'd kind of learned about parts of it through me, and he'd had a look at the controls and everything, I was watching him play, and admittedly, he was still getting used to it. He was still getting hit a lot, and not necessarily attacking when he had a turn, all that kind of stuff. But that being said, he was holding his own better than you might. If you said, "Oh, this guy's never played a God of War game," given he's got no sight at all and he's getting into it, I was like, "Yeah, I can see exactly what you're trying to do."
Sure, yeah,
and you're doing all right. That's a good start.
That just speaks to the game, I guess, doesn't it? Speaks to the quality of the accessibility, then, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, the fact of the matter is, he had the options turned on. I'd advised him on a few. And once he got the hang of it, I was watching him fight, more recently, and I was like, yeah, you're literally getting into the swing of things now. Like, you're not necessarily getting every attack opportunity, but you're getting greater levels. Once I've said to him, oh, this attack you can dodge, and then you have a turn, you can attack from there. Once he knew that, I was like, I watched him on the next pass of that attack, and it was like, okay, dodge into, yeah, there we go. And it's that fun moment of being able to swap stories as well. That's why it's so important. With people like us, but me and Jukesy do it a lot, but me and even the chat do it a lot, where sometimes they'll be like, oh, I was playing this game the other day, and I'm like, either I've played this game or I've not played this game, or the last time I did, we had this thing happen, and that was really funny. And even with God of War, it's great to be able to talk about those encounters. Talk about the encounters whereby, I'm like, I'm in this big fight with this boss enemy, and it's now, like, it's a real pain on giving God of War, like the Stalker fight. And I was like, oh my word, this has had me stuck for weeks. And funnily enough, I was actually talking to Jukesy at the time, and I sort of was talking to him in the background. I was playing the game and trying to see if I could beat that fight, and lo and behold, I beat it, and I went from I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to beat this. This is really frustrating. To yes, I did it! Oh my god!
It's always the way. It's always this is impossible. Then you do it perfectly. And you go, oh yeah.
I mean, it wasn't that it was impossible. I knew I could do it. It was just certain parts of it were just like really getting in the way. Like the enemy would fire 2 AoEs back to back in 2 different places, and it's like you can't really avoid that. I don't think. Maybe you could, but if you're lucky, and then that's the thing. It's half luck and half skill sometimes.
Things like that. Does the PlayStation's 3D audio? You know, if you have the sort of the 3D audio compatible headset,
it works with.
Does it help you get your? Oh, okay, fine. Does it work? So if the 2 AoEs, like let's say one's behind you to the right, one's in front of you to the left, can you tell from the where the noises are, where it lets you know where they are? Does the 3D audio give you an idea in sort of a 3D space of where you should be dodging and aiming and stuff like that, or is it not used in that way?
Kind of, not quite. I think the thing is, usually there's not a persistent cue for the AoEs, so they happen, and then it's like they don't exist, but they still exist on screen.
Right.
That's not always true. I know for certain enemy types later on, they'll drop like puddles of like acid, poison stuff, and when you're in those, you'll hear like Kratos' skin just sort of slightly sizzling.
Yeah.
You're like, oh god, I'm in things. Run.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like that kind of stuff happens. But in terms of 3D stuff, like you will get a sense of behind you to your left, behind you to your right sometimes. But the thing I tend to work with a lot. Partly because I stream on a capture card as well, so my setup's wired a little differently. On stream, at least, it is. The thing I get quite used to is sort of being aware of my audio plus the call-outs the characters are giving. So if I'm hearing enemies moving around me and I get a call-out from Mimir, just go, behind you, brother, left flank, or whatever. I'm like, okay, fine, I know where to go. And it's like, or watch your back. I'm like, yep, fine.
Yeah.
and then to kind of try and maneuver so that either the attack won't hit you or you turn around to block it. It takes getting used to.
I guess it does do a really good job of that though compared to other games. Like I find myself using Mimir's cues like all the time. Where like I'm focused on the enemy that's in front of me, right? And it's like behind, I'm like not necessarily paying attention to the visual cue that's telling me I'm about to get my clock cleaned behind me.
Yeah, just get stabbed in the back by a random like small Draugr.
Yeah, and that happens to me more often than I'd like to admit. But whenever Mimir's like, "Hey, watch your butt," it's like, "All right, good,
it's
cool."
It's the little like rat things that they explode once you. Yeah, the wretches. Yeah, whenever it's like behind you, I swear, I'm like, what does it mean behind me? And then it'll just jump on me. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, cool.
Like behind you, and then you turn, and there's one in every direction. You're like, crap! Like,
which behind me is it? I mean, fun tip for those: if you've got your blades out, you can actually aim, pull, and you sort of squish.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is that with the R1?
You aim your R1, and then you squish.
Nice.
Good to know.
And that plus the Atreus arrows definitely helps. I mean, if they're at range, usually a single axe throw can take them out.
Yeah, that's been my go-to because the first time I was like, oh, the blades will be easier, and I was like, oh my god, I'm like, they just keep moving right out of my my cone.
Well, this might be where you need to have your what is it called, target lock on priority. We have like camera priority. Set those up because then when you're on recenter on attack, that's what it is. So you have that set up. So when you're swinging to hit an enemy, if there's an enemy in front of you, it will start prioritizing stuff, or it will recenter on like a parry as well. So say you parry an enemy that's off to the side, it should theoretically recenter it, and it's like, yeah, my turn now.
I've just been doing a trial, a certain trial that had some time sensitive bits in it, and the wretches. There were like 3 wretches around. I had to sort of kill them all. I had about 10 seconds left, and I was just throwing my axe,
Yeah.
throw, like missing them because they were moving, and Atreus' arrows weren't hitting. And I was like, come on, I've
Ah.
got 2 seconds to
You
knock
need
one of these out.
you need your lock on aim on then. That's
I
what
do
it
now. Well, I
is.
mean, I've done them all now, but
No,
yeah,
I'm saying that's what you need on for those instances where, even sometimes they will just move, but the lock on aim's pretty solid at keeping up with it. It's funny where you can hit enemies through like very distant things. You'll throw it and you think, is that gonna connect? And it will like trick shot off of geometry. And you're like, what? It's like you'll hear the axe go, and then it's like, oh, it's like, how did that hit him from that far away?
The
And then,
physics of the
Atreus-
axe are just
yeah.
so satisfying. Like,
Oh,
I really
yeah.
think it's
Oh,
one of the all-time great video game weapons, you know?
Oh, totally. I mean, it's one of the all-time video game weapons that I've actually got to use and have full agency in, which is even better. Like even stuff, like in 2018 where you'd go, light into Executioner's Cleave. Ooh,
Yeah.
very fun. Or on like a Traveler, if they're stunned, you're just like, "Ah, bam."
Yes.
Yep,
Yeah,
you're
just
done.
chop them right in half.
It's just like, this is for all the problems you've caused me for the past 10 minutes or whatever. But with Ragnarok, I agree. I think a good thing to mention is the DualSense implementation, because that's a huge thing. It's not necessarily leveraged for accessibility, not directly anyway. But the fact of the matter is, it lends so much to like the cutscenes. Even if you can't see what's going on, you get a sense of, oh, this is like sharpening a blade, maybe. Like you get like a 50-50 chance of being right.
Yeah.
And of course the axe is a big part of that as well. Where you throw it, you recoil it, it kind of slaps into your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
all the fun things. And I mean, even the blades where you're, grab an enemy, pull it in, re-grab the enemy, pull him in, and you can just and you feel each of those little.
There's so much
impacts on-
weight behind the way that Kratos fights, like he feels like sometimes like you're like steering a boat, but then like you have those moments where it's like, oh, it's just poetry, like
Oh, there's
so
moments
satisfying.
where it's just like,
Get in the boat, boy.
I was waiting for it.
I thought you might be.
I was counting down. I was like, oh, if we end soon, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, so I know
Yeah.
you do have a hard out pretty soon here, Sightless. So I did want to just ask you a couple more questions before we get going.
Yeah, no,
You got a
of
couple
course.
more?
No, I'm happy to. I was going to say though, with you saying like it feels like you're steering a boat, it's sometimes a matter of, you'll be swinging. It's interesting because a lot of conversations around combat come around to animations. And it's like, oh, these animations are amazing and they make it feel really weighty and impactful. But I don't think it's all that though. Even with like the light axe swing where he does like the 4-hit combo, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And
Yeah.
there's this, even with the audio, like the impact, like the audio, not just necessarily the impacts, but the weight of those swings, even if you're just swinging into thin air, there's so much like momentum behind it. There's the audio design team, did a fantastic job. Even with the blades, like it's before it felt arguably a little more forceful with the blades, but maybe that's a testament to like the control that Kratos has over those.
Sure.
So it's sort of finesse rather than force now, and I quite like that approach of you've got these sort of not quite dainty, but like light little blade flicks, just. And you're like,
Yeah, they feel a lot more
"Ooh."
like a finesse-based weapon than like the axe, which is just so like brutal, and
Yeah.
and like you said, I really think I think in general audio design is underappreciated in games, but I feel like God of War it really shows like what a difference it makes, because there is such a weight to just the way that the swing sounds or the way that he grunts and like
shout out to all the voice cast as well. Like
absolutely.
even with I'm just thinking of Kratos specifically with the serpent snare in this game, the hold R2 equivalent, where you just and it's like you get that, and then the sort of giant squish, and then the sort of end result in sort of frost sort of emission from the axe, and it's like, wow, that, because you see, hold R2 to do this, that, and the other, and you're like, what's this going to sound like in game? And then you don't expect it to be like that. It's like, oh my word, okay. And I even got into a state earlier. If you watch my that I might try and clip it actually. There's a point you can get at in Alfheim where you're fighting all these things, and it's like, okay, what? Or no, no, it's not Alfheim. It's I don't know. Yeah, one of those points around that point in time where I got into a combat encounter and I got into a state. I was really lucky that the enemies didn't attack me out of it, but I went light into hold heavy, into light into hold heavy, just like 3 times back to back to back, and I was like, "Yeah, you enemies." You got really unlucky. This was a bad day at the office for you. But yeah. I know you said you got a couple of other questions. Happy to answer those.
Great. Yeah, I did just have a couple, like, I guess kind of more general questions, I guess, outside of specifically Ragnarok. I feel like from my perspective, right? Like, it feels like the conversation around accessibility has really like had a lot more development in specifically the last couple years, as
Yes.
there have been more I think games like The Last of Us, right? Like really, really marquee titles that have made big strides. And I guess I wanted to ask your opinion about kind of, I guess, the general state of accessibility in games, and like, where do you feel we're at in that conversation, right? You said that God of War feels like a step forward, right? How
a huge step forward is what I was going to say, because it is. If you look at the previous game and this, the difference
that are only
in
like a few
orders of
years removed from
magnitude.
each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, it's a game removed from each other, isn't it? Because
Sure.
it's literally one, like, it's one game apart. Really, well, not that there's a game between, but you know what I mean. Like, it's just an entirely new game, and they've managed to do that much. And some of the plans sort of coexisted when Last of Us Part 2 came out. So the accessibility for that title, there may have been other plans before Last of Us Part 2, but parts of the features from that game motivated what Ragnarok has. So who knows, whatever Santa Monica works on next, it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes in terms of how much they can push through. But in terms of the state of accessibility, I feel like you're right. It's definitely shifted, not just to, we want to make games, how do we make accessible games? It's how do we make games that are accessible and fully enjoyable, I think, is kind of where the conversation is heading. We're not quite there yet. There's a lot to be done. We've seen over the past 7 years, we've seen an evolution on the console side, on the platform side, to varying degrees, depending on who you ask, what platform, how much vision they've got, all that kind of thing, and or what disability challenges they might face. But now we've seen games like Last of Us Part 2. We've seen games like Gears 5, which is arguably still what I would say is the most accessible shooter experience, even now as a gamer without sight. And even then, it is limited in its scope as to how much you can do, but it's still a lot of fun. We'll have to get you both into a squad doing that. That'd be good fun.
Yeah,
I'd
be happy
played
to.
it before. That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, and
The power of
get
Xbox Game Pass will be, we could jump right in there.
Oh yeah.
Get you sniping blindfolded, both of you. We'll get you doing that.
Oh my God, yes, that would be great.
Headshots everywhere. But yeah, like we've had that shift. Sea of Thieves giving constant updates. Forza Horizon 5 being a good example of the potential for an accessible racing game, even though it's not fully fledged in terms of the accessibility of that title. All sorts of interesting examples coming out, and I feel like with accessibility being such a big talking point now, we'll see it shift to making these fully accessible experiences from the ground up, and we'll see it involving disabled playtesters, consultants, even developers down the line as well, hopefully. All sorts of things: content creation, streaming, marketing, alt text on your images. Always put alt text on your images, alternative text, because then everybody knows what's on them, even if they're using a screen reader, and make it clear. There's all sorts of discussions, but we're seeing a huge shift. But the state of there are still far too few accessible games in a mainstream context, and that's what I want to see change. I want to be able to, say when, I don't know, the next big card game or whatever releases, or the next big MMO or it doesn't have to, the next big insert game genre, let's say. So the next like Elden Ring, Souls like or whatever. Whenever that comes out, I want to be able to play it, and I think that's the same for a lot of people would say that. And a lot of sighted people, they understand the need for accessibility. It's always fun sometimes to see people not realize that's one of the things I enjoy, where I'm like, yeah, I play games and I've got no sight whatsoever. I play video games and I've got no sight at all. And then people are like, wait, what? You do what now? And I'm like, yeah, and I beat Sigrun. And they're like, you what now? And I'm like, yeah, sighted help. And they're like, yeah, but still, you what? So, yeah, and it's all, I mean, not just with God of War, but even with like, Gears, with Sea of Thieves, when I say to people, I'm a pirate legend. I'm pirate legend in Sea of Thieves alongside the wonderful Shasters, who's also a pirate legend from the States. We got it like a day apart from each other.
Awesome.
I got it first, and then she got it like a day later. That was a great friendly rivalry that we had, a great friendly competition to see who could get it first. And the best part was we both knew there would be two, regardless of who got it first, we both knew there'd be two pirate legends without sight on the seas, and we thoroughly enjoy that. And then, of course, the shout out that happened yesterday, as of the time of this recording, basically saying, yeah, we've got accessibility consultants in to help work on this feature in Sea of Thieves. So there's a lot of discourse going on around it.
That's awesome.
And a lot of positive discourse as well. That far outweighs any negative connotations of accessibility. Everybody said, oh, accessibility is just making the game easier. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm playing games on Give Me God of War and Permadeath and Grounded and whatever. So, accessibility doesn't have to make the game easier. Like, it makes the game easier for players that need to make it easier, but it can also just allow people to play the game at all.
Sure.
And
right.
that's the key thing. Like, if let's say Star Wars Jedi Survivor comes out next year and it has full accessibility to be played start to finish without sight, I will gladly give it a run through on like an easier setting, and then very likely I will challenge myself to go through it on like the hardest possible thing, because why not? If the settings let me do it, I will gladly give it a go, because then at least I can say I've done it. I've got no sight. There's nothing. I had a person say to me once, I've because you've done this, I've got no excuses to do it now, and I've got full vision, which is always fun. And even with Killer Instinct, there was a fun thing that happened a few years ago. Killer Instinct, I'm a huge fan of that. That was kind of where my YouTube video journey started. There's like 150 plus KI videos on my channel from back in the day when I used to play.
That's awesome.
Including a bunch of ranked footage, so you can see my journey in terms of my skills or lack of with certain characters.
Huh.
But with that, I was on the forums suggesting how to make the game accessible to a greater degree, and saying, here's a bunch of suggestions. I had a fun, what I now see as a fun comment, which was from a person who said, I work with blind people. They don't play video games. It's not the done thing. And I'm like, huh? And bear in mind, this was like when I just started doing my accessibility stuff, so about 7 years ago. And I was like, really? What? Okay.
the
And then
done
I don't think
not
that's
the done
right.
thing. I mean, I thought as much. But the best part was the community rallied around me and the ideas that I'd had as well.
That's awesome.
And
Good. Yeah, great.
That person promptly left.
You
I
know,
think
something that you said, I think, you talked about the kind of like disingenuous conversation around like accessibility, meaning making the game easier. And Steve Saylor, the blind gamer on Twitter and everywhere else, he said something once that that really stuck with me, where he's like, accessibility isn't just about those things. It's also about like bridging the gap for people who might have like a temporary issue or something like that, where like
it's all situational disabilities as well. Like if you, or not even that, but say you want to, I don't know, beat fight a Draugr and have a beer in your hand at the same time.
Sure.
Very, very Thor of you. That's how you want to do it. It's like, where's my mead? I want to like annihilate a Draugr. You should be able to do that. There's no reason why not. Or even like the classic ones, of course, are, if you got a baby in the other room and you don't want to wake it up, what do? Subtitles, there, done. And that's a big thing as well. A lot of people seem to forget. I remember a colleague of mine saying to me once that one of their colleagues had said, a great phrase that is really cool, where they said, "Oh, we are all temporarily able-bodied." I'm like, that's
Yes,
depressing but
right.
true.
And that was the thing, right? Is one of the things
Morbidly
I
true.
remember him saying that stuck with me. Was making that comment, and then a few months ago, I found myself in a situation where, I play drums, and I've started experiencing a little bit of issues with like tendonitis off and on. So
Ooh,
like
yeah.
when games ask you to do the like, oh, jam circle, like press circle a million times really fast, it hurts my hands sometimes. And now like
No, you
more
just-
and more and more games are like you can just press to hold, and it's like that makes a
Yeah.
huge difference in my comfort level, And
I
like
mean, I use press to hold because I'm sick of games just deciding that I've not pressed it fast enough and just making me
yeah,
die.
you're right.
Like I'll be going. Hang on, I've got a dual sense here. Hold on. So I'll be going. I'll be holding it up and just going like that, pressing circle just rapidly as anything, just and it's like that is clearly not fast enough. You're dead. Whereas alternatively, you're just like, I'm just going to hold this and wait, and QTE done. Yay! So,
And
it
in
makes
some
so much of a
situations, it
difference.
makes the QTEs like feel more seamless too, because it's like
Oh,
you can just move through it,
definitely. And you're not accidentally like dropping the thing you're trying to lift, or
Right.
or whatever happens to be going on at the time. There's always that. And in terms of like giving yourself challenges, you should be able to play the game at whatever difficulty level you want. I went and pushed myself through getting to Shadow Jago and Killer Instinct, the boss version, and that took me an hour to get through. Like not the rest of the fights itself, just him.
Wow.
Just boss Shago took me an hour. And the reason was I had it in my head that if I quit the game then, like when I started maybe sort of 20 minutes in or whatever it was, I knew I wouldn't. I felt like I wouldn't be able to get back to it, and I was like, I'm persevering with this. I don't mind how cheesy I have to be to get past it. I don't really mind as long as I can say I've done it. Lo and behold, an hour later, and about 4 gigs of match footage later, I realized after I looked at it, I was like, oh god, that much later, I managed it, and that was partly because the game's audio design. So unintended accessibility is crucial. The game's audio design let me do it. Whether that had the audio cues for combo drops or whatever on, whether it had those audio cues or not, it wouldn't have mattered because the audio design was there as well. So I could tell, I've blocked an attack, I've hit him, he's hitting me. That might be a light or a heavy or whatever. And so there's not just traditional, accessibility menus, accessibility features, whatever to consider. It's a matter of sometimes you can design stuff in and have it work on its own. So like puzzle hints, for instance, people might want to turn those off, but it doesn't have to just be like text on a screen. It can just be, is there a thing over there? Or as Mimir says, what is it? Have you tried hitting the rope, holding the block? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, for goodness sake, Mimir, come on. You think I can get that tiny hitbox? No.
My
Yeah.
God, he saved my ass. It was so funny. I was talking to somebody on Twitter about like people complaining about that. And he saved my ass like last night. I was doing a puzzle, and I was
Yeah.
like, for the life of me, I cannot find this last rune that I got to hit to open this chest. And he's like, oh, why don't you try the one above your head, brother? And I was like, oh, there it
Did he
is.
actually say that? Oh my god! If he actually says that, I'm going to be really pleased. I'm going to have to try and find that. That's
He's like,
amazing.
try looking up. And I was like, oh, shoot, okay. There it is.
I've had like characters are just holding part. Like as soon as I'm like, I'll take 2 seconds to think about it. It's like, have you tried this? I'm like, well, yeah, I was getting there. Like, give me a second.
Sometimes it happens like that. Other times you'll get no hints at all.
Exactly. So I'm doing some of the Nornir chests, some of the later ones, and I'm just like stood there for 8. Like, there's sort of a mechanic for the Nornir chest you unlock sort of later into the game. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Maybe.
And they're just because it's so small. I'm just like looking around for ages. Like, come on, now's the time for you to chime in and go, there it is, it's over there. And I was losing my rag. I was going up and down the thing. I was getting in the boat and going like, where is it?
It's like what's he doing now? Oh, he's looking for a Nornir chest. Fine, I'm not going to help him. That's fine.
Yeah, leave him be.
He's considered himself that good that he's unlocking these legendary items. That's why I'm not going to give him any hints. He can have my place as the smartest man alive. That's what Mimir's probably thinking. And that's the unfortunate thing. But the best thing about it is the puzzles give me hints then to then tell people. So if I can't get through a puzzle, if they're saying, oh, you need to power the elevator, they're saying you need to, I don't know, cut a rope doing a thing, or there's a chain over there, or even if they just say, oh, over there, and then I'll say that's what Atreus said earlier, and whoever's assisting me will be like, oh, he's looking over to the right, and there's a thing up there. I'm like, oh, okay, I'd never known that's there. So it really helps. Even those tiny little things will really be useful. Even unintended accessibility design is an interesting thing, because audio cues, even on their own, like that, I didn't notice this until I fought a bunch of the sort of smaller. I don't know if they are Draugr, to be honest. I've just taken to sort of naming enemies by either what they sound like or what they end up doing. So there's like the 2-hit sword guys, where they will sort of prep and then do 1, 2. There's the sort of pig dudes who will do whatever they want. I think those might be the same thing at times, but I'm not always sure. But the point being, the 2-hit sword dudes, I actually started watching their attack patterns, and they have like an idle animate or like a prep animation, where, at least in my mind, they sort of raise their sword to strike, like they prep it. And you can actually hear, if you listen very closely, it's really hard to pick out most of the time, but you'll sometimes hear like a low growl as they do it. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's an incoming attack then. I see. And
I'm definitely going to be listening a lot closer, I think.
it's like a small sort of thing. They won't do anything else. They'll do that, and then about a second or just under a second later, they'll do 1, 2 with the sword, and it's like, okay, fine. Or the other one I rather like is, I mean, of course, the enemies when they power up their projectiles, that's fun. But the fun one I enjoyed in terms of a mechanic is the sort of shielded. I don't know if they're Draugr, but there's shielded enemies that you fight in a section of the game where you can actually bait out their attacks with just by attacking sort of nearby. So if you don't have to hit, so you pull a light attack, they will go to do an attack that then you can shield bash them out of. So it's like, I'm deliberately baiting you into attacking me, and then you shield bash because that cue's there. So it's, light, shield bash, they're stunned, then you attack. And that's not exactly unintended accessibility, but the fact that the audio cues, then you can learn that. It's not an attack, it's not a mechanic it teaches you, but you're like, oh, if I just, okay, light, yep, shield bash. And you get the satisfaction of it. I think that's partly what accessibility is about as well, the satisfaction of it, of unlocking those fun moments of, oh my word, did you just see me do that? And you want to be able to enjoy those without needing assistance at all. If you have people there watching you, that's different, but you don't want to have people there saying, left, right, go forward, there's loot there, there's this, that, and the other, or this is the menu you're in. That's a thing that I'm looking forward to seeing gradually reduced as games become more and more accessible. Of course, there'll still be older titles that you'll want to play that won't have those features, but that's where remakes and remasters come in. So with these remakes and remasters, if you're doing all the graphics and everything from the ground up, why don't you put accessibility in as well?
Sure.
Because there's no reason why it shouldn't be done. If anything, it's going to make you more money.
Yeah, if you're doing it for a new audience, why don't you expand that audience?
Right.
Exactly.
To people that won't be able to play originally.
If we want to be really shallow, it's about money. But if we want to extend that, you're introducing so many people who may not have been able to play before, or who might be unable to play now but could play the original. So, people who played, I don't know, the original Dead Space and were really stuck on that turret section, but they managed to finish it because somebody else did it, and then they beat the rest of the game. They might not be able to do all of that at all now for, I don't know, disability reasons. For it's like, say, I don't know, they're a drummer and they've got issues with, as you were saying earlier, the fact of the matter is, if they want to play this, they're going to need those features in place to be able to play it. And suffice it to say, I am really excited for Dead Space next year, because I'm curious to see what happens. Because the original Dead Space had an unintended accessibility design thing in it. It's actually quite a big one. You remember the objective system where you could press in right stick and it would point you to where you needed to go? That is arguably unintended. At least I've never seen any confirmation that it was designed as accessibility specifically. And in Dead Space 2, they enhanced it. They actually gave you options, so you could go to the nearest save store, the nearest bench, the nearest objective, the nearest can't think of the other things now, but you know what I mean, the nearest whatever it was. So you could do that, and that kind of, if you look at now, Last of Us Part 2, Part 1, that takes that system and other systems like it, as well as a bunch of other options from over the years in various formats, and combines those into a whole cohesive package. I'm just very curious to see whether Dead Space Remake will keep that in any capacity at all, and if so, what else it will do to add to the accessibility, particularly, as they've already said, there's going to be accessibility. They haven't said what, but they've said they're going to be working on it. So, yeah, I kind of be intrigued and curious as to how that all plays out, and feel like there could be a discussion on the cards there as well, actually saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once that comes out.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna hold you to that appearance on our Nintendo podcast to talk about their failings as well. So yeah, we will definitely have to have you back on the show sometime soon. But I know that I promised you I'd get you out of here at 10, and it is 10:30 in the UK.
That is my fault. I talked about too much.
Hey, when the conversation's good, you let it roll. But
that is my job. I talk far too much. That is my job.
But before we let you go, why don't you just one more time give everybody the plugs, tell them where they can find you, where they can find your Twitch streams, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I am SightlessKombat. So you can find me SightlessKombat on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and my website www.SightlessKombat.com. And you can also actually find the Transcribing Games project as well if you search hashtag Transcribing Games, all one word, with initial capitals on the T and the G. If you want to see how that all works on YouTube as well, you can find the God of War videos if you want to see what audio description might look like in a God of War game, or in a cinematic style thing like that as well. But yeah, I look forward to hearing from you all and having a chat with you all about what we've said today, and any other accessibility questions. And if you want to drop into my streams, say hi and ask questions firsthand for live reactions, then do feel free, and rest assured you will see more God of War on those streams, and of course other games as well. What have we done? Hellblade, Dead Space 2 we did as well. We've done Resident Evil Village, both Horizon games. We haven't platinumed Forbidden West yet, but we will do. Lots of Sea of Thieves, lots of Gears, lots of Minecraft Dungeons as well occasionally, amongst many other things that you will be able to come and see on my streams. But I'd like to thank both of you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. And,
thank you for joining us.
I look forward to any future accessibility discussions that happen here.
We'll definitely have you back. Absolutely. So, and of course, we'll have links to all of the places you can find SightlessKombat down in the description down below. So make sure you go and give him a follow and go check out some of his stuff. And if you do go catch him live, make sure you tell him that we sent you. So.
And you could say in the form of words for that. Mission failed. We'll get him next
time. There we go. So if you want to connect with us, all the places you can find us on the web, of course, FlipScreen.games is the website. You can find our Discord, our Twitch channel, our YouTube channel, our second YouTube channel where we put up the VODs of the Twitches, all that good stuff. Wherever you go, wherever you show your support, we appreciate you joining us. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Max. He's been SightlessKombat. We'll see you next week.